And I'm going to make sure that you guys can hear this little pre-recorded about brushes. I'm going to play it for a couple of seconds and you can tell me if you can hear the sound or not. So brushes, did you hear that?
Yes.
Very good. So I'm going to continue, and we're going to hear about brushes in watercolor now. Exist in different sizes and forms. So this would be considered a flat brush. It's a 1-inch flat brush. So it's flat because the tip of the brush is flat. That's why it's considered a flat brush. This would also be considered a flat brush. And you can also have a small flat brush. So it's flat, and the ferrule is also, it's skinnier than when you look at it this way. Now there are also, here, this is a good example. So there's also a round brush. So this round brush it's very nice, and the head of it is, you know, is great because the way that it's set up, when I dip it in the water or in the paint, it actually, the belly of the head, it will accumulate a lot of water and a lot of pigment for me to paint. So I can go a long way with this. Now, in this case, you can see the ferrule has been taped right here to the handle because this had become loose and came off, sadly. So I taped it. But this usually happens when, if you wash your brushes with water and you use hot water, the glue that's inside the ferrule that glues the ferrule to the handle will become loose, and that's how it comes off. Another reason that this is called a round brush is because the ferrule, which is the middle part, is round. So when you wash your brushes, you should always remember to use cold water. So this is a big round brush. This would be a small round brush. A round brush has a round ferrule, as opposed to a flat brush that has, you know, a skinny side and a wide side. Now there's also a brush like this, for example. This is a good watercolor brush. It's got a lot of hair, and so that the belly will accumulate a lot of water. But the tip is not a fine tip. It's a round. So this is called a mop. And it's very nice to do a large area that does not have any kind of sharp edges. There's also this one here. This is called a filbert. And it's round at the head, except there's a tip that is very fine. And so this, you can tell when I put it sideways, the belly has a lot of hair, and so it will contain a lot of water. And this is a good brush. A good brush is defined by a brush that doesn't lose its hair, has a head where the belly will accumulate a lot of water, and it's got a fine tip. The tip doesn't look super fine, but if I were to wet it, I'm gonna wet it. So here I'm wetting. You can tell how it's got a fine point. And so therefore with this brush, I can paint a whole painting like this one, because it's got the fine tip for the detail, and it also has, you know, a belly that accumulates quite a bit of water and pigment when I need to. I thought there was one more that I wanted to show you. A brush like this one. So this would be considered a round brush, but because of the length of the hair, this brush, it's called, now I'm only remembering the name in French. It's a traînard, that's a word in French, but it's a rigger. That's what it's called. And the reason it's called the rigger is because when artists who paint boat, when they want to paint the ropes on all the, the rigging, then they use this kind of brush. There are thinner ones and bigger ones like this, but it also accumulates a lot of water in the belly, and it's got a fine tip, so it's pretty good. All right. So is there any questions about brushes at this time?
Nope.
Have you guys been listening really well to all of my explanations? Yes.
Yes, if you gave me a test right now.
The one part of the brush that I haven't talked about, and I'm going to talk about right now. Let's see, I'm going to take this one. No, this one's big. So this part here, where there is, you can tell that there has been like a tool that pressed all the way around to make sure that it grabs onto the handle. This part here is called the crump. It's actually the crimp. I'm sorry, the video gives the wrong name. It's like a cramp, but it's crump. So now that you guys have confirmed that you have listened really well, I'm going to put you to the test. So I'm going to share my screen and display the brush. And now I'm going to give you a few minutes to note on your sheet what are the different parts. All right, so now I'll give you maybe a minute and you can name A, B, C, D, and E, and F. And then after that, I'll display the answers. Does anyone need more time? Okay, so I'm going to display the answers now.
Farewell.
So these are the answers. So the handle is pretty easy. I mean, the handle of the brush, and the crimp is, in the video I was saying the crump, but it's actually the crimp. It's where the ferrule attaches to the handle, and the ferrule is actually the whole metal part here. And for a round brush, it's round. For a flat brush, it's flat. And for a filbert, it's also flat. Now the head is all of the hair. And the head is composed of two parts: the tip, which is right here at the very end, and the belly, which is this part where all of the water and the pigment accumulates in order to be able to paint with. So is there any questions about the parts of the brush?
Nope.
Guess no one has any questions. So now I need to close this. Here it is. All right. So now that you guys know all about brushes, actually, there's way more to know about brushes, but I think this is the bare minimum that could be useful, especially if you go to the store and you want to buy a brush. Now you can name it using the correct name for the type of brush that you want to buy. Now, those types of brushes exist for watercolor. They also exist for acrylic, and they also exist for oil. However, the brush itself will be a lot softer. The hair will be a lot softer and will for a watercolor brush than it is for a brush that is for acrylic or oil. Okay, now I'm going to spotlight for everyone. Now we're going to talk a little bit about graded wash, and we're going to practice it. So but before we do this, I want to show you what we're going to do today. So I have actually, I found this. This is an apple that I did in colored pencil, and I thought that Kevin would be happy to see it, just because Kevin does a lot of pencil drawing. So this is a drawing of an apple that I did with colored pencil.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And I was looking all over the place to find a drawing in black and white of an apple, and I couldn't find it. But I did find a couple of small apples that I did in my little book. So this one is done with harmonious color. So all the colors here are contiguous that I used here are contiguous on the color wheel. So from magenta to red to orange to yellow. So this is what I used here. Whereas in this case, I painted the apple red with its complementary in the background, which is green, and a little bit of green as well in the red to in the places that where I wanted it to be darker. So those are ways that you can paint in apple. But before we do that, let's do some graded wash. So if you have not prepared your paper yet, I suggest you prepare one. And I think we're going to cut it in four parts. So we have 4 spaces to practice. To mix my colors, I usually use a small round brush, or I could use also a small flat brush like this. You can also use a bigger brush, but what I find is if I use a big brush to mix my colors, then a lot of pigment are left in this brush. And if this is not the brush that I want to paint with, or if I need to mix another color before I paint, then I have to get rid of all this nice pigment that's in this brush. That's why I like to use a smaller brush. If I need to clean this to move on to another color, I only lose this much pigment. So first I squeeze out the color. See right here on the side of my little well. I did the same thing with my red. And then I dip my brush in my water and I mix it little at a time. I don't put the color at the bottom of the well, because if I do that, then as soon as I start putting water, then I lose the pigment and I don't know if all has been mixed or not. So that's why I put it on the side. Now the texture of the color that has been prepared should be equal to about like 3.25 ml or light cream. If it's as watery as water, then there's a good chance you have a lot of water and very little pigment, and this will result in painting with very light colors on your paper. So now I've mixed almost all of my paint. I still have a little bit, and it's getting very, very thick, this color. See how I scrub my brush on the sides. So in order not to lose too much of the pigment that's in my brush. And when I put my brush in the water, I don't move it around. I just put it in the water delicately and take it out. And this way I don't lose the pigment that's already in the head of the brush. Now you know that this means the bristles. Now that you have successfully passed the test, I bet you all did. You're all aced it. Right, so now I have my paint. And if I were to put it here, see, it's fairly heavy. It's not really runny if I were like going like this. So that tells me that this will be good. There's a lot of pigment in this paint that I prepared, and this will be good. Now, because I want to paint with the red, because you can see better on the screen if I use the red, I'm going to prepare my red. Before I do, see, I shook the brush very well in the water, and now when I go like this on my paper towel, then it's clean. I can see it's clean. So now I dip my brush in the water, and now I'm going to mix my red. I'm just going to go a little faster. Excuse me. Now this red, the pigment in this red is very, very thick. I can see it when I mix it. It's immediately go to the consistency of heavy cream. So I know that if I were to paint with this, it would cover a lot. So I just need to put a little bit more water. There. Can you see well? I think with the yellow, it was a little bit more obvious what I was doing. With this red, it's not as obvious. I'm going to put it down so I can go faster. Here, I'm just putting a little bit more water. Okay, so now I've diluted everything, prepared my color. Maybe I want a little bit more water. Okay. So now this one, just to show you, it's also pretty thick because it doesn't run at all. Now that this is done, I'm going to switch brushes to paint with because I find that to do a flat wash, nice flat brush like this is very convenient. And the first thing that I do is I wet my paper. So I do have this bowl of water is the bowl of water where I dip my brush to prepare my colors. Now I'm going to dip this one into clean water. And if you don't have a bowl of clean water, you can dip it into the water that you prepared your colors with. It's not a big deal because we're just doing exercises. But if you were to be doing a watercolor for a competition, or you want to have very clean colors, then you'd have to make sure that that your color, that when you wet your paper, you wet it with clean water. Okay, now I've wet my paper, and I'm going to do a flat wash with my red. And like I showed you last week, if you put a lot of red onto your brush, you can actually see all of the pigment on the brush. So this will help to cover the paper very well. So I just go like this, back and forth. And just going back up. So now this is a flat wash. And if I want to make this into a graded wash, I can dip it again and just add some more pigment at the top.
Mm.
Now I'm just wiping my brush, and I'm dipping it into the water. I'm wiping it on the paper towel, and I can remove a little bit at the bottom to have it more graded. And with the gravity, because mine it's inclined, it will give me more of a graded wash. So lighter at the top, darker at the bottom. Now I'm going to give you time to try the exercise. So to make the green, you have to use the two primary colors that are on either side, which is the Canyon Yellow Medium that we have. In the case of this color wheel, it was called the primary yellow. The Canyon Yellow Medium is a little bit more warm than this one. And we also have the Ultramarine Blue, which is the same that was utilized to create this color wheel. Now the green is a mix between the yellow and the blue. And so this is what I'm going to demonstrate now. And the green is called a secondary color, whereas the yellow and the blue are primary colors. So I have here my yellow that I made with the Canyon Yellow Medium, and I have my blue that I made with the Ultramarine Blue. Now to create my green, it's a trial and error. So I start with a little bit of my yellow in a new well. And I am using my small brush to do this. So I'm putting a little bit of yellow in my new well. And in this new well, I'm going to also put some of my blue. But before I do, I clean my brush in my water. I wipe it onto my paper towel to make sure that it is indeed clean. And now I'm going to use a little bit of blue. Now it's a trial and error, so I'm going to put a little bit of blue into this new well where I had put the yellow. And I think I'm going to mix it to see what I get. So mixing the two colors, it's giving me a pretty interesting green. Now I'm going to take a little strip of watercolor paper. I usually keep my strips of watercolor paper and put a little bit on it to show you the actual color that I got. So when mixing Ultramarine Blue with this Canyon Yellow Medium, it gives me some sort of an olive green. And it's a little lighter than what I want. So because it's a little lighter than what I want, then I'm going to add a little bit more blue. But before I do, I have to clean my brush again. Because if I were not to clean my brush and put it in the blue, then this blue would be contaminated with this green. So I'm going to take a couple more of these. Now mix it up and test it again. So you have, when you prepare your color, when you prepare your green, you have to do trial and error. And now this time, it hasn't really made a whole lot of difference. So I'm going to put even more blue. And I'm trying to go slowly because once I go past the color that I want, which is the dark green, then adding more yellow might be something that might require too much yellow to be added. So it all depends the strength of the pigment. So anyway, here. Now I am getting, I think, to the green that I want. So now you can see here by adding even more blue, I got a nice green. If I go thick, then it gives me nice green. If I go a little thinner, I can still get something that's lighter. You can see here. But the first time it was a little bit too yellowish. Now, this is the green that I created this time. If you have a color wheel like I showed you, you can always compare to your green and see if that's close to that color. And that's how you know that you're at green. So if I were to compare the green with this green here, it's pretty close. It's certainly darker than this lime green, and it's certainly lighter than this turquoise. So my green that I just made is pretty close to this green. So that's how I know that I've succeeded. And also you can see with your own eyes if it's a green or another color. All right, so now I've prepared my green, but I'm not sure I prepared enough. Anyway, I'm going to take a chance. And I'm going to do the graded wash with the green. So my brush that I had used with to do the graded the red graded wash, I need to clean it very well. Then dip it into the clean water to wet the paper, like so. And I'm trying not to drip like last week. Last week I actually had mishaps because I dripped. So I'm trying to avoid that. Oh, and now that that's done, now I'm going to dip my brush into my green. And I prepare barely enough. Now you can see that I have a lot of green on my brush. It's going to be lighter than my red. And it's a nice olive green that we get. So I'm making sure that I have enough pigment at the top, and I'm going to go towards the bottom with less pigment. I'm wiping my brush a little bit on my paper towel to make sure that the top part is lighter. Now if I turn it upside down, I have a nice graded wash that goes from light green to darker green. Any questions? So I'm going to give you some time for you to try. So this is just a piece of paper, like this, loose paper. Actually, I have two sheets. And if I wanted to do a piece of like a circle in the middle of this, then I can use this part of my hand or of my knuckle, this part, as the pivot, and just put this on the paper, put my pencil here, and then just circle the paper around it. So if I go like this, see this knuckle is kind of like my pivot. So if I put my pencil here and I go like this, it's very important that you don't move the knuckle. Just go around and see now.
Wow.
The circle is pretty good. But if you move your pivot point, like your knuckle, then it won't work. So if I were to do it one more time, I can do it bigger, and I can use this as my pivot point, this here, this part, like this. So I can go like this and do a bigger one. See? So if you ever need to do a circle, like last week we did the sphere, this is one way to draw your circle. You can also use like a bowl and you just draw around it, or you know, any kind of round thing like a plate maybe. But if you don't have that, or if you're a teacher and you want to impress your students, practice that. And I had a geography, an algebra teacher, and he was able to use his shoulder as the pivot point, and he would go like this. Let's see, he would go like this, and he would be able to do a very large circle that would be the, you know, the length of his arm would be like, so this would be like a shoulder, and he would go like this with his arm and paint and draw that on the blackboard. That was very impressive. But to do our apple, we will not need to do a perfect circle because an apple is not necessarily a perfect circle. Now on to doing a graded wash with two colors. That's something we had started preparing, practicing last week. Let's practice this week as well. In order to do this, I'm going to prepare some more of the green because I'm out. Now this time I'm going to start by putting my blue first and adding the yellow afterwards. So that's another way to prepare the green. I think the yellow is stronger than my blue, so that's why I'm putting a lot of blue. Now that I have put all of the blue that I wanted to put, clean my brush completely, and then I'm going to add some yellow to my blue. I'm pretty sure I don't need a whole lot. Ooh, that's a nice dark green, but it's more of a teal color, as you can see in my little test strip. So now it's a little too dark. I just need to add more yellow. So my test strip is just a little piece of watercolor paper that I cut out in little pieces. So I'm adding a little bit more yellow because I need it. I think it needs it. So this would give me a pretty dark green, darker than the green that I used here. You can tell. So maybe I'll add just a little bit more yellow, like so. So I'm going to use the green and the red to do my graded wash this time. So I still have a lot of red. So now I have this for my green. That's pretty close to the green that I had before here. Remember, this one is dry and this one is wet. When this one dries, it will dry a little lighter. So I'm going to try with this one. So I have my red and I have my green, and now I'm going to do a graded wash from red to green. Where's my brush? Oh, here it is. So first I'm cleaning my brush completely. Then I dip it into my clean water. And I'm doing it, the demonstration, only once. Now I want you to do the two trying the same thing. So I'm going to just do the one demonstration. Then I'll give you the chance to do both the same thing, because it's not easy and it doesn't always happen right. And practice makes perfect. So I'm trying to make sure that my paper is not too wet before I start. And now I'm going to start. The first time I'm going to start with my red. So you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm just starting with my red up here. Now, as I come down, I don't want to have too much pigment, so I'm wiping it on my paper towel a little bit to make sure that I don't have too much pigment. I make sure that I don't go all the way to the bottom, because if I do, then I will not have any of the green that is just green. Now I'm dipping into my green, and I start from the bottom with my green, and I'm going to go up like so. And now I'm going to get a pretty good graded wash that doesn't really have a very sharp line in the middle. Now I'm tempted to work some more on it, but I'm let this dry and try it again. Now, when I tried this one, I think I'm going to paint it this way to try something different. Is there any questions about the graded wash before you try? Okay.
Mm.
So I'm going to share my screen for this. And oops. So this is my apple that I've painted in the past in acrylic to show you. So this is the painting that I did, but it's in acrylic. It's not in watercolor. I've showed you the watercolor paintings that I've done in my little book. So as you can see on the left, the photo, on the right, the painting that I did an interpretation of the apple. And so therefore the background, which was gray, which I thought was very boring on the photo, I decided to make it a nice brown color and rich and warm. And to make this nice, rich, warm color, I simply mixed some red with a little bit of green, and it gave me this nice brown, rich color. And here at the bottom, because this is acrylic, I was able to put some white in some yellow, and it gave me this kind of beigey color. But here on the apple, that's what I want to bring your attention to. So an apple has a lit side, which we can see on the photo. It's where the little speckle of light is. And it's got the dark side, which is on the left. But on the left, there's also, if you look here in this area, there's also reflected light. So whatever light is hitting the table reflects onto the apple. So that's why, even though the right-hand side is the dark side, there is some areas that are lighter because of the reflected light. And here in the front is the same thing as well as over here. So that's why it gives this. Now, I'm going to be looking at the apple, but I'm going to be sharing my screen, stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to be sharing, how I'm painting it. So you won't see the apple that I just showed you, but you will see this. Okay. I think this is good. So, my apple is a round. It's like the sphere. You have to think about it like thinking about the sphere. So the apple is round. So it's going to be something like this. So I'm wetting the middle part where the apple is. And it's a tall apple. I need to have a paper towel in my hand. I don't want this to drip. And so now my apple is a red apple. So I'm dipping into the red. But I'm trying to paint it, you know, in the wet. So for as long as it's wet, I can continue painting it. So the apple is tall. Gives me something like this. And it's got some darker area at the bottom. And it's got this speckle of light that I'm going to just I could use a paper towel to do this, but I'm going to use a smaller brush. And with this smaller brush, I'm going to remove the area where the speckle of light is. So I'm just removing the paint while it's wet. So it's creating an area that is lighter and has a soft edge to it. And I have this area at the top here where I have the stem that comes out. Ooh, this is almost wet, almost dry. I'm just going to go like this. So this is where my stem is, comes out of. Give me some interesting. Because it's still wet, it allows me to create this area where the edges are soft. I have reflected light on this side. So with my dry brush, I'm just removing a little bit of paint from here. Now it's starting to dry, so I've got to be careful how I do this. And over here, there's also some lighter area that I see on the photo. So I'm just removing this like this. So it's kind of interesting. Give an interesting pattern and texture to the skin of my apple. All right, so this is my apple. This is the first layer. Now I'm going to build the background. Because it's a red apple, I'm going to put a nice green background. And I'm going to paint it upside down. So I need to just clean this just to be ready. Have a nice surface to paint with. This is where I'm just doing this. You're not seeing what I'm doing, but I cleaned my palette is what I did. Now I want to make sure that we have enough colors. I'm just squeezing out a little bit more of the yellow and the blue. Okay, so to do the nice background, I'm going to wet the whole surface with my clean water. So I'm going to make sure that I work fast enough here. Now that I've wet almost to the apple, now I'm going to use some of my green color. And give it a nice green background. I want to make sure that the table is not too far away from the apple. It's not too high. And I'm going all the way to the apple. And I want to make sure that this background is not just dull green. So I'm putting a little bit of red in my green. And some of the green has got to be a little more yellowish. So I can dip into the yellow just to give nice color. Now I got to make sure that my wall is equal on either side. And just to make it more interesting, give it a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red into my color. This have dried. Now I'm giving, just going this. All right, so now we have a nice background. Ooh, ooh, ooh. That's dripping. Ooh, last week that happened to me. And this week it's happening again. Just didn't pay attention to this. Now I'm going to dry it so it doesn't drip on the painting. Okay, we're good now. Whew, saved. And I'm going to set this apple on a table, but I'm going to make the table a very light color. And I'm going to mix a little bit of red with a little bit of green, but more green than red for my table. And this color, I'm going to make it a very light color. So now I'm wetting up my table surface with clean water. And I've taken another brush just to make sure that it's clean. And I'm just going to barely put some color. See the nice brown that I'm getting? Getting this nice brown. Got to make sure that the table touches the wall and the table touches my apple. It's getting me a nice brown because I mixed my green with some red. That's how I'm getting this beautiful brown here. All right, for the table. So basically, I'm pretty much painting with the red and the green for everything on here. Now, one thing that's important is before this dries, I have to paint the shadow. And the shadow will simply be another, more of the red mixed with the green in an area. Let's say the light comes from this part. So it'll cast a shadow over here. So I'm going to put this shadow over here. Shadow has to touch the object. Doesn't have to be a large shadow. You see, I'm still painting with my big brush, even for the shadow. So the shadow sometimes has a little bit darker, closer to the object. There. So now I have this. And using a small brush, sometimes you can remove just a teeny little bit, like so. Alrighty then. Now it's time to rework this nice apple. So the apple that I painted first has dried. And now's the time to give it some more shape. And to do so, I'm going to use a smaller brush like this. And so one thing that I like to do is I like to give this here a little bit of my nice red, nice lime green color where the stem comes out. So I'm using this color to paint this area here. It's too dark. This area here. Like this. There we go. It goes towards the back. So there is some green there. And I know that there isn't any green on my apple over here, but I like to add what I see in the background. I like to add it on the object because it kind of reflects together. Now, I'm also going to add some of the darker red in this area because my apple is very, very dark here. Now I'm painting with more pigment and I'm painting with a dry brush. So that's what gives these nice effects to the color. And over here, this is all very dark. So because I have a lot of pigment now on my brush, I can easily paint on top of what I have under, and it's not removing what I have under. It's not going to budge. Now, if I were to add too much water to it, then it would completely change what I have put under. So I'm putting a little water, but not too much. And this is my reflected light. So I don't want to cover this too much. Now I'm adding a little bit of orange to the other side, just to make it more interesting. So this red now is a little bit more orangey. So I'm forming my apple very delicately. And so now I need to add the stem. Well, to make the stem, to make the brown of the stem, what I need is a mix of my green with my red, and that will give me a nice brown color. And so I can put the stem and I can shape it whichever way I want. I'm just going to put it like this. And once I have put the stem, then I have to make sure that I indicate where the shadow of the stem is. And it will be about like this. Now, my apple, the only funny thing, the only part that looks a little funny is this, because the red went on over. I could just try to erase it a little bit like this. Now we have an apple. And the background's very abstract, very loose. Any questions?
You may